But the people who have the guts to say what they mean and mean what they say and take the flak, those are the people who've inspired me. And it was a principle my dad said, say what you mean what you say. And he said, don't attack people personally. And that was in my mind after this attempt to smear people last week. He said to me something I've never forgotten. He said, when I was about 8, he said, never wrestle with a chimney sweep. It's a ridiculous thing to say to a child of 8. And I realized what he said to me was, if somebody plays dirty with you, don't play dirty with them or you'll get dirty too. And I think that's not a bad principle. And on the whole, those three men reflect that as well. Any of the problems we talk about, it has to be on the basis of encouraging people and not discouraging them. Now, I've done a rough calculation, about 300 people. And if the average age in this hall is 40, then there would be 12,000 years of experience. Well, you're a bit younger. 12,000 years of experience in the hall. And if you're all my age, there's 24,000 years of experience. And the reason I say that is because if we're going to solve any problems, we've got to have the confidence to study our own experience. Oh, there's another reason for thanking you. You sent me a lovely birthday card the other day, and so that disposes of the preliminaries. But the question of civil liberties has now become an absolutely major question, and I'm really pleased you've put it on the agenda as the centre of this year's meeting. I was going to the House of Commons the other day in my car, and a young policewoman beckoned me over, and I stopped, and she said, I'm searching you under the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So I said, all right. And she said, what's your name? So I said, Tony Benn. She said, how do you spell that? So I told her. She said, what's your date of birth? What's your postal code? What's the registration of your car? And all the rest. She searched my car. There were no bombs on it. And I said, why are you doing it? She said, well, you are approaching a building of high sensitivity. I said, I know, I'm going to the House of Commons for a meeting. But it wouldn't matter to me. If I had been a Muslim with an interest in chemistry, I'd have almost certainly been now in Belmarsh prison. And this is the situation we're in at the moment. I hate to say it, but I wouldn't trust my civil liberties with the present government for a moment. I think they have taken them away, and they've taken them away for a whole range of reasons. The most important reason at the moment is the war on terror. Well, now, I don't know about you, but I didn't think it was a war on terror. I thought we invaded Afghanistan and invaded Iraq. And to call that a war on terror is a complete distortion of meaning. After all, put crudely, there's no difference between a suicide bomber and a stealth bomber. Both kill innocent people for political reasons. And similarly, I hope I'm not stirring you up too much, but if this country were invaded, would we not defend it? I mean, when I was 16, I joined Dad's army. You could at that time, you know. You were too young to join the Air Force. I joined Dad's. I was trained as a terrorist. I was trained to use a bayonet, a rifle, a revolver, a machine gun, fire a missile, and if the Germans had arrived and I'd seen a German in a restaurant, I'd have thrown a grenade in. Would I have been a terrorist or a freedom fighter? So the language that's being used is completely wrong. But, of course, they're being used against us, and that is what it's all about. And we have to see how we respond, because I don't know about you, but I found when I look at any problem, I'm much helped by looking at the origins of it. I mean, nothing is new in this world. And, of course, civil liberties were widely denied from the beginning of time. I mean, if you take the slave trade, for example, if you were a slave, you had absolutely no liberties or no freedom of any sort or kind. And don't think that's so long ago. I met a famous American singer whose name will be known to you, Paul Robeson. He was the son of a slave. So it's pretty recent, and if you take the trafficking of women and so on, slavery is still going on in a big way. And the question is, how did we ever win the civil liberties that are now under attack? And I've thought about that a bit, and I expect you have too. What really changed it? Why did slavery end? And I have a feeling, I'm putting it very simply, one slave saw another slave being flogged or executed, and he said to himself, who gave them the right to do that to him. You began asking questions. And out of that, of course, came movements for civil liberties. But they're all quite recent. Don't believe that Magna Carta was a charter of human rights at all. The king was having a row with some of the barons, and they were a bit too strong for him, so he conceded in Magna Carta the right to be tried by your peers. Now, at that time, that meant exactly what it meant. If you were a peer, you were tried by other peers. But, of course, the idea of trial by your equals became embodied in the idea of trial by jury, and that has been eroded. You know now, I forget, is it 28 days or 90 days? But anyway, they take away your freedom without a trial. And even in these demonstrations in London the other day, you've heard about what they call kettling. Had a big crowd and they put police around them so they can't escape. And that is imprisoning those people, all right, perhaps only for an hour, 2 hours, but you're imprisoning them without any sort of trial. And these liberties have been eroded. Then you come to the next question, is the relation between religion and freedom. Now, I was brought up by my mother as a Christian, and we used to read the Bible every night, and she said to me, the story in the Bible is the conflict between the kings who had power and the prophets who preached righteousness. And she taught me to support the prophets against the kings. It's got me into a lot of trouble in my life, but the older I get, the more relevant I think that is. And you see, in some way, I mean, many people, and I fully understand it, say, well, the idea of civil liberties and freedom comes from Christian teaching, but the church didn't take that view. In 1401, they passed in the House of Commons the Heresy Act. And the Heresy Act made it a criminal offence for a lay person to read the Bible. Why? Because they didn't want the laity to read what was in the Bible, because they might come to different conclusions from the priests. After all, if you believe in the Bible, loving your neighbour, why aren't you treated like that? And I've always imagined a conversation, I don't know whether it took place, but it must have done. Somebody went to a bishop and said, Bishop, it's a very unfair world. And the bishop said, I know, my child, but if only the rich are kind and the poor are patient, we shall all be rewarded in heaven. And somebody said, Bishop, that's wonderful news. Could we possibly have it while we're still alive? And out of that religious message came political movements for freedom.
20 minutes for comment and questions and discussions. There are, I think, some mobile microphones. So if you want to speak, just put up your hand and I will acknowledge you, and just wait for the microphone, if you would, before you make your comment or your question. And the icebreaker is going to be the gentleman there. Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? Yes. Good. You mentioned, Mr. Benn, I think quite rightly, about optimism and determination, and you also mentioned about, or there was mention about the late Jack Jones. In your long career, who have you admired who has had courage, political courage and determination, who you've known well, and the courage of their conviction to carry it through?
Well,
particularly,
I can answer the question very simply. If you ask me the three people who have inspired me in my life from the present generation, none of them were white, none of them were European. I tell you who they were. Gandhi. I met him when I was 6 as a little boy, and I can't remember what he said, but he, unlike most adults who pat you on your head and talk to your dad, he was sitting on the floor, and I sat next to him, and I listened to him. And that is something I've never forgotten. Mandela, I mean, the thing I so much to remember about Mandela, but the thing in a way that today's meeting is most relevant, when he was in Robin's prison in South Africa, he said to the jailers, I'm the only free man in this prison. And you work that out. They were imprisoning him, and he said, I'm free and you're not. And the third one is Desmond Tutu.